The last frontier, space, is an old goal everyone hopes to achieve. Now, space wasn't a huge interest until the late 40s to early 50s. The highest flying thing was the Paris gun. Space is one of the most unknown things in science. We have learned so much, yet so little, about space to this day, but we are still discovering new things. The vast expanse of space is too large to see everything. Science fiction has inspired scientists to do amazing things. Jules Verne created books about many things we have today, like rockets. But what scientists have created is much more real. Space exploration is the discovery and exploration of space. The era of space was driven by the space race between America and the Soviet Union. After the Cold War and World War II, the first rocket was the V-2, which was tested in World War II for military purposes. The V-2 rocket became the first man-made object in space. After the war, America and the Soviet Union took the Germans' rockets and made modifications and made it fail. The first scientific experiment in space was a radiation experiment on May 10, 1946 by the U.S. The first images of Earth and the first animal experiment followed the same year. The Soviets also had V-2 rockets and with their own modifications to make the R-1 in 1947. It included many radiation and animal experiences. This was only the beginning of the space race. The first successful orbital launch was the Sputnik 1, which was a satellite made by the Soviets on October 4, 1957. It made radio signals that could be heard from radios around the world. It ran on the R-7 rocket. A month later, the Soviets sent the first docking state, whose name was Laika, and was the first animal to orbit the Earth. In the next year, right after the Sputnik 1 launch, the government made NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, on July 1958. NASA is a government-funded organization which was the official America's space program. The American space program unsuccessfully tried to launch a satellite on January 31, 1958. It finally orbited the Explorer 1 on a Juno rocket. Up to this point, there are no human flights. Human flights was now a main target of the space race now. The Soviets succeeded in the first human flight. 27-year-old Yuri Gagarin was the first man in outer space, which is a great honor. It happened on April 12, 1961. It was a part of the Voskhod program. The first human flight in America was Alan Shepard. He was on the Freedom 7 on a Mercury Redstone rocket on May 5, 1961. The first American to orbit was on February 20, 1962 on a Mercury Atlas rocket by John Glenn. The first woman in space was Valentina Tereshko. On the Voskhod 6 on June 16, 1963 by the USSR. The U.S. launched a total of 2 astronauts in suborbital flight and 4 in orbital flights through 1963. But John F. Kennedy wanted more from the program and decided to raise the stakes of the space race and get a man on the moon and back safely by the end of the 1960s. The race to the moon was on. The first man-made object on the moon was the Luna 2 in 1959 by the Soviets. There was many more lunar missions, but NASA made the ultimate rocket, to the moon. NASA had been working on a rocket that could take a man to the moon and back. It took lots of work and research, but NASA made the Saturn V. To this day, it is one of the most complex and powerful machines on the planet. It is the most powerful, tallest, and heaviest rocket ever launched. It was launched 13 times at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The project cost a huge $6.4 billion through all the flights. At 363 feet high, 33 feet in diameter, and a crushing 6,540,000 pounds, it is the only rocket to take humans to the moon. The Soviets tried to make a rival, the N-1 rocket, but it never succeeded, and in its failure, made the largest non-nuclear explosion in history. The Apollo 11 mission was the first mission that landed humans on the moon. Americans Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on July 20th, 1969. It was launched by a Saturn V rocket from the Kennedy Space Center. Astronaut Buzz Aldrin described the rocket as breathing with life, and little bits of ice falling with each breath. It was the fifth manned mission of the Apollo program. It took them 3 days to get to the moon and then went to lunar orbit. As Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of the moon, he stated his now famous quote,
"It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind."
The mission was successful and fulfilled the national goal proposed by John F. Kennedy. After the retirement of the Saturn V, viewers realized it spent too much money on these huge rockets that couldn't be reused. So they came up with something that could go up like a rocket and land like a plane and would be able to be reused. They came up with the shuttle. The shuttle was a glider-like vehicle that could go into LEO, low Earth orbit, and glide down on a runway. The program officially started in 1972. The shuttle had 2 solid rocket boosters that were reusable and a disposal external fuel tank made of high-density foam. It usually carried at most 8 astronauts and could hold up to 50,000-pound payload. The shuttle was much simpler than the Saturn V rocket missions. The space shuttle had a main use of building the International Space Station, ISS for short. The shuttle was used as a transport of parts and humans to it. The ISS is used for experiments about how things react in space, like plants or toys. Now, the moon wasn't the only thing that humans explored. Mercury was the least of the explored inner planets. As of May 13th, the Messenger and the Mariner 10 mission have been the only ones to come even close to making observations about Mercury. In 1967, Venera 4 became the first to enter and directly examine Venus's atmosphere. But in 1960, Venera 7 became the first probe to successfully land on the surface of Venus. Mars has always been an important object for space exploration since the 1960s. Many countries, including the US, the Soviet Union, Japan, England, have sent probes to study it so we may learn more about it. Many are trying to send the first human beings to Mars, like NASA, who is trying to send human beings to colonize on Mars by 2020. The exploration of Jupiter is solely on animated NASA spacecraft since 1973. Many of its explorations were flybys, which is when a probe examines the object without landing or entering orbit. The Galileo spacecraft being the only one to enter Jupiter's orbit, mainly because of the small objects around it, and Jupiter not really having a surface. The exploration of Uranus has only been by the Voyager 2 spacecraft, with no other plans to visit it. The closest observations by Voyager 2 happened on January 24, 1986, which it explored Uranus. There are bound to be deaths in the exploration of unknown things. Sadly, many have fallen in the US and Soviet space programs. Here are the ones who lost their lives in the expansion of space exploration. Soviet astronaut Valentin Bondarev was training in an altitude chamber and dropped an alcohol-soaked ball on a hot plate and died from third-degree burns all over his body. This was the first space-related death. American Theodore Freeman was in a training jet and crashed due to a goose on October 31st, 1967. Americans Elliot C. and Charles Bassett crashed in a training jet and died on February 28, 1966, in a spacecraft test. Astronauts Bergen Grimson, Edward White, and Roger Caffey burned in the cabin of Apollo 1 on January 27, 1967. Soviet Vladimir Komarov was landing on April 24, 1967, but there was a parachute failure and died on impact. On October 5, 1967, Clifton Williams, and on December 8, 1967, Leo Robert died in training jet crashes. Soviets Georgy Zborski, Iskar Paintsy, and Vlaka Bolokov had the first deaths above 10,000 miles. The shuttle disasters Challenger and Columbia on January 28, 1986, and February 1, 2003, took the lives of American astronauts Gregory Jarvis, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onka, Judith Rezin, Michael J. Smith, Dick Scobie, Rick D. Husband, William McCool, Michael P. Anderson, David McBrown, and Lauren B. Clark. Israeli astronaut Illa and an American schoolteacher, Krista McCoffey, also died in these disasters. Sergei Vorovsky drowned on July 11, 1993. American Michael Ellsbury crashed in test flight on October 31, 2014. All these people will be remembered because they have made huge contributions to space exploration and will be remembered for their deaths. People thought that finding new lands and America was the greatest achievement, but it turns out that was just the tip of the iceberg. We never knew what was out there in space until we decided to explore it. We have been to the moon. We have studied planets beyond ours and learned so much. There are entire new galaxies for us to explore, but there could be other life out there other than us. But for now, we will just have to see if we can find them. There is one thing we cannot stop doing: exploring space more and more.